Welcome to our Dayforce Deductions and Arrears Processing webinar. I'm Terry D'Elia, the Human Resource Director, and I have with me Sandra Clemency, our Payroll Manager. Sorry, we're having a technical difficulty here with our screen. There we go. Okay. So for today's agenda it's quite packed, but I feel fairly confident that we can get done in an hour or less. We'll certainly leave time at the end for questions. I'm sure that you will have those, as this is a new process for us. But on the agenda today, we're going to talk about what are deductions and arrears and when that functionality will go into effect, which deductions will actually be participating in this process. It won't be all deductions. And then we'll spend quite a bit of time on the payroll process, how that calculates and how it deducts for arrears. And we'll talk about what happens when an employee's benefits end, but there's still an arrears balance. And what happens when an employee terminates employment with an arrears balance. We'll talk about how to collect additional benefit premiums for those who are terminating, how to refund deductions for those deductions that have the arrears functionality turned on. How to adjust an employee's arrears balance, what information the employee will see related to arrears activity, and we'll touch on on-site checks, auto voids, and additional checks, and if they'll affect the arrears balance. And then, as I said, we'll leave time at the end for questions. So to begin, the deductions and arrears functionality in Dayforce is a way to automate the tracking of deduction amounts that are not collected as a result of the employee either not being paid or not having a check that has enough money to cover those amounts. And then it also has a mechanism to automatically recover those amounts in subsequent paychecks. So if you think about it, I mean, we've been dealing with deductions and arrears since the beginning of time. That's not really anything new, right? Right now, when you process your payroll, there is a report that shows you the deductions that aren't taken. And at least as of this morning, you would have to look at that report and you would have to find your own mechanism for keeping track of those deductions that weren't taken and then process whatever adjustments were necessary on your own to collect that. So up until this morning, you were having to do that on a manual basis. Turning on this functionality in Dayforce is just a way to avoid you having to take all those manual steps and letting Dayforce do some of the work, unfortunately not all of it, but some of the work for you. So while we might be thinking about deductions and arrears specifically as it relates to those school employees who don't work during the summer, but their benefits are kept active and they don't have paychecks during the summer. So obviously those deductions will go into arrears. And they're probably the most likely group that this will affect. But this isn't just unique to those 10-month school employees. This is really throughout the entire diocese. And this can happen to employees who are at parishes, as well as employees who work here at the Central Administrative Office. We know in our schools that often following the Christmas and Easter breaks, there are reduced paychecks for those hourly employees who don't get paid for the entire break. And sometimes that lesser pay causes deductions to go in arrears. We also could have employees who are on unpaid leaves of absence. Perhaps they're on family medical leave and they no longer have any sick or vacation time, and so they go without pay. Or it could be that they're taking a personal leave of absence unrelated to family medical leave. Or perhaps they just take a week off and they don't have any leave to cover it. We also have times when we have new hires who enroll in their benefits within the first 30 days, but the election is not done in enough time where we can actually take their first benefit deductions from a scheduled paycheck. For example, if we have an employee who is hired at the end of February, they have until the end of March to elect benefits, but their benefits are actually effective March 1st and should start coming out of the next paycheck. And so often they miss that first check, possibly even the second check. And up until this time, in order for us to collect those missed deductions, we would take the entire missed amount from the next paycheck, which could be quite a burden for those new hires. With turning on this deductions arrears functionality, we'll be able to collect those missed benefits, but we'll be able to take it over a longer period of time and thus not have quite the impact we have to those new hires' pay. And the same thing can happen when employees change their benefits due to qualified life events. birth of babies or marriages, divorces, and dependents turning age 26. All of those things are things that allow employees to change their benefits outside of open enrollment, and they have 30 days to do so. But again, those changes are effective on the first of the month following that actual event. So sometimes by the time we get that information, we've already missed some paychecks. So this will help to collect those missed deductions, but to make that a more streamlined approach. So when will this go into effect? Actually, the functionality has been turned on as of this morning, but it will be in effect for next Friday's paycheck. So whatever you process starting on Friday, the end of the pay period, the system is going to start looking at those deductions uncollected and actually be able to put it into the arrears. Now, it's not retroactive, so it's not going to look back in time and say, hey, what was possibly in arrears or is in arrears right now that you all have been holding on to, in some form, a report or a piece of paper or something. There's not anything it's going to do for you in that respect. This is from something that's happening going forward, but it will start with the March 3rd paycheck. Now, the arrears functionality is going to be in effect only for our voluntary benefit deductions. And those are the medical, the dental, the vision, and the 3 supplemental life insurances, that for the employee, the spouse, and the dependent. And we're beginning it with this new benefit year, which starts on March the 1st. And those premium changes or benefits take effect on the paycheck of March 3rd, which is next Friday. And as we announced when we announced open enrollment, this year we have changed in that we are no longer going to have what we've been calling our 10-month benefit plans. Instead, everybody who has an active benefit will be enrolled in a 12-month plan. And what that will mean is that everybody will be paying the same insurance premium 2 times a month for 12 months out of the year. And then those employees who miss a paycheck for whatever reason, because they're 10 months or they just miss a paycheck or they don't have enough to cover it, those missed deductions will go into arrears. And then the arrears functionality will automatically collect those missed premiums over subsequent paychecks at a rate of 34% of the regular premium until it's paid in full. So I want to highlight that regular premium. So it's not 34% of the arrears balance, but 34% of what the normal premium would be for that benefit. Before I turn it over to Sandra to talk about so how is this really going to work in Dayforce, I just want to give you an example. And this is an example that is actually in our lay employee benefit guide that went into effect at the beginning of the year. And this example was actually provided to 10-month employees who are participating in our benefits so that they had a real life example of what this could look like for them for this next benefit plan year. So this chart on the right shows 26 paychecks, starting with the check of March 3rd and going through next February the 16th of 2024. So this is an example, just assuming that the employee is already hired and remains employed and remains with the exact same benefits from now until February. Obviously, things could happen in between that might change that. In this case, the employee is a 10-month school employee who does not receive pay over the summer. But because the employee is coming back after the end of the summer, his or her benefits will remain throughout the summer. So there's no loss of coverage, right? And so what you can see is from March through June, the normal premium is $127. And presumably the employee has enough pay to pay that $127 from all of those checks. So nothing goes into arrears from now until June. But then the summer hits, and in July and August, this employee does not receive any pay. School's not in session, they're not working, and so but yet they're still having benefits. And so that $127 is uncollected and will be placed in the arrears balance, so 4 times. When the employee comes back at the end of August and gets the first paycheck on September 1st, the system will take the normal deduction of $127, and then it will take $43 of the arrears balance. And if you were to do the calculation, you would see that 34% of $508, which was the arrears, is $43. And so on that September 1st check, that employee's deductions would end up being $170. The same would happen on the check of September 15th. On this check of September 29th, while the employee is getting regular pay, we don't normally take deductions on the 3rd paycheck of the month. So there will not be a regular deduction taken, but the arrears will still be taken. And that's why you see that on the September 29th check, there would be a deduction of $43 rather than the $170. And then it would revert back to the $170, as you can see, from October through January. And then in February, we get the February 2nd check, we get the final remaining balance of that arrears. So it's only $33. We're not going to collect more than what's due. And on February 16th, the final check of the benefit year, that one final regular deduction. So you can see that the employees, this employee who has individual coverage over the course of a year would pay $3,048 for it. By the end of the year, they will have paid $3,048. But you can see that some will be collected as regular premiums and some will be collected as arrears deductions. All right, I'm going to go ahead now and turn over the presentation to Sandra, who's going to really get into the more specifics about how this is going to work through the payroll process.
Thank you, Terry. Let's go over what happens during the payroll process. When the payroll is calculated, Dayforce will determine if the employee has enough pay to cover the amount of the voluntary benefit deduction. Any amount that cannot be taken will be placed in arrears. As part of your payroll audit, you will be able to see voluntary benefit deductions that are being placed in arrears by reviewing the deduction not taken audit report, by reviewing the employee flyout statement, by reviewing the arrears and balance section of the employee's payroll election screen in People, and by generating and reviewing a preview payroll register and the arrears transaction audit report. So let's review the deductions not taken audit report. This continues to be an important step in your payroll auditing prior to committing your payroll. Any amounts that appear on this report should be researched and reviewed with the employee's flyout statement for accuracy. If the employee statement is correct, no further action is required. If the employee flyout statement is not correct, make any necessary corrections to timesheet hours or auto pay generation, recalculate the payroll, and review the employee flyout statement again until it's accurate. Here's an example of the deduction not taken audit report. As you can see, deductions that are not set up to collect arrears, such as health savings deductions, will also show on this report. The current process is for the payroll processor to print out this report and use it to key quick entries in the next payroll in order to collect missed premium payments. With the arrears functionality turned on, processors will no longer need to manually track missed premium deductions, as Dayforce will now track them and then automatically withhold missed amounts from future paychecks for you. The employee flyout statement shows any voluntary benefit deductions that cannot be taken in full. The statement shows the scheduled deduction amount as well as the uncollected amount. The uncollected amount will be shown as a negative amount along with the arrears description. The difference between the scheduled deduction amount and the arrears amount is the amount that will be withheld from the employee's paycheck. Also during the payroll calculation, Dayforce updates the arrears and balance section on the employee's payroll election screen in People. This screen continues to be updated with each payroll calculation, adding positive transaction amounts to increase the arrears balance owed and adding negative transaction amounts to reduce the arrears balance owed when arrears deductions are made. Please note that if you leave the payroll election screen open and go back to payroll screen to recalculate the payroll, and then return back to the employee's election screen, please be sure to refresh the employee election screen to update it with the data from the most recent payroll calculation. To run a preview payroll register in payroll, click on the reports icon and search for the payroll register report. The preview payroll register will provide you with information on an employee's arrears activity for the current payroll. To find arrears entries on the report, press and hold simultaneously the Control key and the F key to open a search box. Enter the word arrear, and you will be taken to all employees who have arrears activity during the current and past payrolls. On the left is an example of an employee with arrears from a prior pay period showing the additional amount withheld and what the remaining arrears balance is. On the right is an example of an employee with a newly created arrears amount. From the Dayforce menu under Data and Analytics, Reporting Reports, the Arrears Transaction Audit Report can be run to show you arrears transaction activity by employee or by pay group. The report includes all calculated payroll activity for committed and uncommitted payrolls. This report can be used as an auditing tool to validate arrears deductions during your payroll process and prior to committing your payroll. This report can also be used to provide arrears transaction history to your employees upon their request. To run the report, click on the report name and then click on Run. This window will open where you can choose if you want to enter filters to run the report for a single pay group or just one employee. Then click on Run Report icon to submit. Here's an example of what the resulting report looks like. The report provides you all arrears transaction activity by employee by code for your pay group. When the payroll is calculated, Dayforce will deduct for the regularly scheduled deductions first. Then it will deduct for any amounts in arrears. If the employee's voluntary benefit deduction is still active, then 34% of the regularly scheduled deduction amount will be taken with each subsequent payroll and applied to the arrears balance until it is reduced to zero. Processors can see voluntary benefit deductions being deducted for arrears during the payroll process by reviewing the employee flyout statement, reviewing the arrears and balances section of the employee's payroll election screen and people, and by generating and reviewing the preview payroll register and the arrears transactions report. When an amount is deducted for arrears, the employee's flyout statement shows the scheduled deduction amount as well as the additional arrears amount collected. The additional arrears collected will be shown as a positive amount along with the arrears description. The amount deducted from the employee's pay will be the sum of the scheduled deduction and the arrears amount. What happens when an employee's benefit is ended, but they still have an arrears balance that needs to be paid? In subsequent payrolls, Dayforce will continue to withhold to pay off the arrears balance. But please note, instead of the arrears amount being calculated at 34% of the scheduled deduction amount, Dayforce will now calculate and take 34% of the remaining arrears balance until paid in full. What happens when an employee has terminated employment, but they still have an arrears balance that needs to be paid? Collecting arrears balances from an employee's final paycheck, including vacation payout, continues to remain the payroll processor's responsibility. This is required even if the employee is transferring to another diocesan location. Let me stress here that this continues to be a manual process. The Dayforce arrears functionality will not do this for us. Therefore, we have revised the termination pack form to remind you of this responsibility, as well as providing the steps to collecting the outstanding arrears balances in Dayforce. Terry will review the new termination pack form with you at the end of this presentation. Now let's talk about what happens when an employee terminates employment but will not receive enough pay to cover the final month of voluntary benefit premiums. Collecting the entire month's premiums from a terminated employee's final paycheck continues to remain the responsibility of the payroll processor. This holds true even if the employee is transferring to another diocesan location. For example, if an employee terminates at the beginning of the month and is only going to receive one paycheck in their terminating month, the processor must collect additional benefit deductions on the final paycheck to cover the entire month of premiums. With the arrears functionality being turned on, this process now will require an additional step. Not only will a quick entry be needed to collect the additional premium, but a second entry is now needed to the employee's arrears and balance screen in People. Use of the updated termination pack form will serve as a reminder of everything that has to be reviewed when an employee is terminating or transferring employment, as well as provide detailed steps for processing all necessary transactions in Dayforce. Here's a review of the steps needed for terminating employees. Step 1 is perform a benefit review to determine if an entry is needed to collect additional premiums from the employee's final paycheck. Step 2, if needed, enter the additional premium amount as an adjustment to the employee's arrears and balance screen in People. Step 3, then refresh the screen and view the employee's updated arrears balance to determine the amount that needs to be collected. The balance is shown under the total arrears preview column. Step 4, key the quick entry for the total arrears amount due. So for example, if the arrears and balance screen were added, in the arrears and balance screen, we added the additional medical premium amount due of $122.88. The previous arrears balance was already $122.88, bringing the new arrears balance to $245.76. $245.76 will be the quick entry amount that needs to be keyed and taken from the terminating employee's final paycheck. Step 5 would be to calculate the payroll. And step 6 is go to the employee's People payroll election screen and scroll to the arrears section and validate that the employee's arrears balance is now 0. Step 7, and the final step, is go to the employee's flyout statement in payroll and validate that the arrears balance has been deducted from the employee's final paycheck. We encourage you to reach out to payroll support if you require any assistance with these steps. If a scheduled benefit deduction is withheld after an employee's coverage has ended and requires refunding, please contact payroll support for assistance before proceeding. Remember that it is the payroll processor's responsibility to ensure that scheduled benefit deductions are not taken from paychecks issued to terminating employees in the month following their termination. For example, an employee terminates at the end of the month and is scheduled to receive a final paycheck in the following month. The processor must ensure that benefit deductions are not taken from that final check. Here are the steps to determine how to make an adjustment to an employee's arrears balance. Go to People, Payroll, Payroll Elections, and scroll down to the Arrears and Balance section. If an active arrears entry already exists, click on the black arrow next to the code to open a transaction window. In the transaction window is where you can add, delete, or change a non-system generated entry. When adding or changing a transaction, always enter a detailed description of why you're making the adjustment. The amount of the adjustment is keyed under the delta column. Key a positive to increase the amount of the arrears balance owed. Key a negative amount to reduce the arrears balance owed. The transaction date should equal the next paycheck date to be processed. If an active arrears entry does not already exist, click Add, enter the deduction code, and enter the first date of arrears using the next paycheck date to be processed. Then scroll down to the Transactions section and click Add. A line opens up where you can add a detailed description of why you were adding the adjustment. The amount of the adjustment is keyed again under the delta column. Key a positive amount to add an arrears balance. Enter a transaction date, which should be the same date as the first date of arrears you entered. Employees can see current arrears activity on their pay stubs. Employees do not have access to their payroll election screen, so they cannot see their cumulative transaction activity. If an employee requests to see all their activities, an arrears transaction audit report can be run by employee and provided to them. On-site and void checks can incorrectly affect arrears balances. Therefore, before processing any on-site or void checks that have any benefit deductions, including 403B and health savings account, please reach out to payroll support before proceeding. Depending on each situation, additional fields may need to be flagged and/or additional entries may be needed to keep the arrears balances accurate. Processing additional checks for an employee also has the possibility to incorrectly affect an arrears balance. Just like on-site and voids, if an additional check has voluntary benefit deductions, please reach out to payroll support for assistance before proceeding. Employees who transfer to another location without a break in service and into a benefit eligible position will have their benefits transferred automatically. This, however, requires the exiting and receiving locations to coordinate their efforts. The termination date at the exiting location and the hire date at the new location need to ensure that there is no gap in benefit coverage. So, for example, employee terms date is June 30th at the exiting location, but the hiring date at the new location is July 2nd. The employee benefits will end at the exiting location on June 30th, but will not begin at the new location now until August 1st, creating a gap in their coverage. The documents listed on this slide have been updated to address the new arrears functionality in Dayforce. All have been posted to and are available on Freshdesk. Now I'm going to turn it over to Terry so she can go over and talk about the new term PAC form.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So as Sandra said, we have updated the termination PAC form and it is posted to Freshdesk, so it's available now. And you'll see that it's a much longer form than it had been in the past. HR is famous for doing that. But we're hoping that this will actually make the termination process easier. So some of this will look very familiar, obviously prefix, last name, first name, clock number, last 4 digits of the social, the pay group, and whether the employee is terminating from the diocese or transferring. These are all fields that have been on previous termination PAC forms. Certainly termination date is always a date that we ask for on the termination PAC form, but in this one, we've now included some reminders so that you'll hopefully make a more informed decision as you're selecting the termination date. So for non-contracted employees, reminding you that that's the last day of work. For contracted employees who are leaving before the end of the contract, that's also their last day of work. But for contracted employees who are terminating at the end of the contract, you will remember that we have key dates charts and it's important to follow that date.
It's still on the presentation. They can't see the form.
Oh, they can't?
No.
What do we do?
New share
Please stop sharing.
at the top,
Oh.
new share,
Okay.
and click on the,
Screen?
Yeah.
can they see it now?
Can you see it now?
No one has that.
Can somebody let us know if you can see this
I
now?
can see it on mine. I can see it.
You can see it on yours? Okay, so sorry that you weren't able to see that at the beginning. We haven't gotten very far. So we were talking about termination date, the fact that there's a little bit more guidance so you can determine the date. I'm going to show you how this form is going to work just by giving you an example. If someone were to leave, somebody was non-contracted or contracted at this point, and today was their last day, we would enter, I don't know, number line. Let's try it again.
Oh,
There we go. So we would put today's date in here. And a little bit further down, I'll show you why you might find this helpful. The status, we've reminded to always select the status of term. So this is an actual drop down and it's the only available option. When you're actually in the term form on Dayforce, you'll notice that there are a number of other statuses available. We do not want you to use those other statuses. We always want you to use term. Even if you know the employee is retiring, we don't want you to select that. These are those other options are reserved for the use by Employee Benefits Office, and the timing needs to be appropriate for that. The reason codes, when you do your drop down, these are all the reason codes that you see in Dayforce. Those that start with an I are for involuntary reasons. Those would start with a V are for voluntary reasons. As a reminder, if the exit employee is going to receive severance payments, then we'd like you to select a code that indicates with severance. Severance is not something that is required by law or by policy, and it's not given very often, but when it is something that does need to be coordinated through human resources, either through me or to Dana. So please be sure to continue to do that. You know what eligible for rehire is. The last pay date, this is the last check date that the employee will receive for regular pay worked, and this helps control timesheet access. So even if the employee is still due pay for other things afterwards, you'll still be able to make those payments, but at least by using the last pay date correctly, it should prevent an employee who's left from getting into their timesheet and making additional entries that are for time not truly worked. Of course, you still have a comment section. If you know that the employee is transferring to another location, we would hope that another diocesan location is what we're really interested in. It would be helpful for you to put that in this section here, but certainly not required. The part that's really new now really is this for payroll processor completion, and this is to help you. So these are the steps that we would expect all of the payroll processors to take as they have an exiting employee. So the first one is to perform a benefits review. Does that person have voluntary insurance benefits? Yes or no? Did you notice that when I clicked on yes, it automatically filled in the benefit end date for me based on what I had keyed up here as the termination date. So if I were to put in now something in March, when I scroll down, the date will now say March 31st. Now, this isn't something that you actually enter into Dayforce. When you process the termination form, Dayforce knows when to end the benefits, and we'll do that appropriately. But this is just to help remind you, because the next question is, if they have benefits, and now you know when those benefits are going to end, you need to ask yourself, will that employee get 2 paychecks in this month? And will those paychecks be able to cover it? And if the answer is no, then you know you need to collect an additional premium or premiums. So the next section is, if the answer to C is no, you complete this chart with, well, what are the benefits that they have and the pay period amounts that they pay. So I'm just gonna, put in $100 just as an example. And the number of paychecks that they'll miss in that final month. It could only be 1 or 2 because we only collect from the first 2 checks. If I put in 2, you noticed over here, the Excel automatically did the calculating for me, and I could do something similar throughout, throughout the chart. And then for each required adjustment over here, you will need to key an arrears entry onto the payroll election screen under the arrears section, following the steps that Sandra just went over in the presentation. So you want to start with benefits because the first part is of understanding arrears is first accounting for, let's just call them future arrears, which I know doesn't seem to make sense, but when we say arrears, we're really thinking about the deductions that were missed in the past, but also the deductions that could be missed in the future. So we want to do the benefits review first. And then we are either already on the screen or we go to the screen if the answer was no up here. And we want to record for these various deductions, the total required adjustment. So if you had made a benefits adjustment, this amount would reflect that. But it certainly could be more because perhaps, like the example we had a few slides back, that employee had an arrears balance, and then on top of it, we needed to collect something from their last paycheck. So the required adjustment is actually something greater. And then you'll do the process you're always used to, which is to then in the payroll, do quick entries for these values, these codes and these values. If you do both of those, then, and provided the employee has enough pay, which is obviously something that's important, but provided they have enough pay, when you do that, you will collect all of the arrears amounts and you will be current for the month, and the employee's arrears screens balance will be set to 0. And therefore, if they were to come back in the future, you'd be starting anew and not have to be worried about something remaining on there that was old. The next section is really for school employees. So we're just putting in here reminders about the possibility of needing to do a contract reconciliation. So if the employee is a school employee, then you have to ask yourself, do they have a contract? We're reminding you, these are the only positions that would have a contract. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, did they work the entire school year or the entire contract? If the answer is no, then we know that we have to do a reconciliation. And these fields below should probably look familiar to you because many of you have had to do contract reconciliations in the past for a variety of reasons. We've just inserted that right here into the termination pack form. So you can put the number of contracted days worked, and you can put what the contract was for, and how many contracted days were in the contract. So it will calculate the daily rate for you. And then it'll tell you the true amount that's been earned then for working those 121 days. And then of course you'd have to go into Dayforce to figure out, well, how much has been paid to date. And then it will tell you the balance remaining on the contract. And it will remind you that if the variance is positive, then that's the amount that's owed to the employee on that next paycheck, and you would key that as a quick entry to replace the auto-created salary. And if the variance is a negative number, then the employee's been overpaid, in which case you need to contact payroll support for further guidance of how to collect that. The last step for employees who are leaving is determining if they have a vacation balance. Do they have one or not? If so, how much is that? What do they normally work on a biweekly basis? And then it reminds you that in order to pay that out, you'll do quick entries in the payroll, each paycheck for the amount entered here until the balance is paid in full. And you have the ability to just record that down here. This is just a free form box for you to keep track of it. And then lastly, we just have as a reference, the current school year calendar as published by the Office of Catholic Schools. So that if you have somebody who is leaving in the, who is contracted and is leaving in the middle of the contract year, you could come to this chart and more easily know the number of contracted days that they worked. But please note that the amount of contracted days may be a little bit different for your location. As you can see here, based on what we were provided by the Office of Catholic Schools, it comes to 196, yet we know that this school year it's 194. So those other 2 days perhaps are different for each school, I'm not sure. But at least this will be a really good starting point, and I think make that process a little bit quicker for you. So this is the new termination pack form. As I said, it exists on Freshdesk. We hope that you will find it helpful. If you start to use it and there's anything that is confusing or not working as expected, or you have suggestions for how we could improve it, by all means, please reach out to us and we will certainly make whatever corrections we can to make it as helpful as possible. We have some questions, Cindy?
One question,
Okay.
and this question was asked when you were discussing the arrears being deducted at a percentage.
Mhm.
It's the question is, if an employee wants this done faster, can we override the calculation? If we do that, will it shut the per pay period arrearage calculation off?
Okay, so to be clear, The question is, if an employee wants to direct us to collect more than the 34% that's automatically going to happen, can we do that?
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
Okay, and so the answer to that would be, yes, you could do that. But you would want to, A, get that in writing from the employee of what they're requesting. And B, recognize that if you decide to do that, then you are going to be the one who is going to have to override the quick entries every pay period. There's not a way to change that 34%. That automatic 34% is what the system is going to collect. So if you want to collect more, you have to do that through a quick entry in which you're overriding it. Now, if it's a one-time thing, perhaps you don't mind doing that. But if it's something that goes on for quite a long period of time, I mean, you're really committing yourself to make sure that you do that and that you do that properly. So that would be up to you to do that, but certainly the system allows you to do it. It just means that when you're, whatever amount's being deducted, it's just going to reduce the arrears balance more quickly. You won't have to do anything else in the arrears because there aren't any new arrears.
Right.
You're just paying off the existing arrears.
Right.
So again, that's not something that we're putting out to our employees. That's an option. We're going to really leave that to you all to make that decision. But if you do, please remember that you want to get that in writing and recognize then the responsibility to do that properly and track it properly is going to fall on your shoulders.
Right, make sure you're looking at the employee flyout and that the results of what you keyed in quick entry are actually occurring on the pay stub.
We have one more. Will the system create quick entries for the 34% arrearage, or does it just happen in the background and then appear on the flyout and in reports?
Right, it just appears on the reports and on the employee flyout statement. It does not put any entries in quick entry.
So good, because there's not a need. It's just saying, okay, I'm going to take the normal deduction and then I'm going to take, that's still the same deduction code actually.
Right, and and that's why you need all these extra reports and ways to look during the payroll process, because it isn't evident. It's not going to, you're not going to see it right there in quick entry. So you do need to look at that deduction not taken report, and actually the preview payroll register is really nice and really shows you the transactions for identifying which employees' deductions have gone into arrears,
right?
And
So
which are being withheld.
right. So we showed you that there is a variety of things that you can do to find out what's happening with your arrears. We're not necessarily saying that you have to do every single one of those.
Right.
We're just saying that all of those will provide you with really great information. At the beginning, you may want to do all of those just till you start to feel more comfortable about what information is being reflected and how it might help you review your payroll, what works best for you. We even here, we've only been testing, so it's going to become part of our process. And I'm going to guess that, Sandra and Kathy and Cindy, as they do their payrolls, they're going to start to feel, more comfortable about which one gives them the information that they need.
Right.
It's pretty much all has the same information, just in different formats.
Yes.
No more questions?
No more questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have another one.
Okay.
For any current arrears balances as of today, can we manually enter them in for an employee now to have it tracked in the arrears system and it start collecting the balance?
Yes, you can do that. And it will spread it out. It's going to take that balance and do 34% of the regularly scheduled premium amount. So yeah, if you want to spread that out and have the system do it for you. But then again, once you key it in on that arrears and balance screen for that employee, calculate your payroll and look at that employee flyout and make sure it's doing what you expected. Okay, because this is new for all of us. And although we tested it, we weren't able to test every single scenario, but yes, you should be able to add that amount.
Yeah, there's no reason why you can't add that
Right.
amount. We didn't include it in the presentation just because we didn't want to to add more to your plate or overwhelm you. But certainly if you've been keeping track of that, you're comfortable that you know, that's the data. You absolutely should go in there and you could do that today, actually.
Yes, absolutely, and calculate that payroll, and
Mhm.
as long as the employee's timesheet has time on it, it'll, you know, you can validate it.
Okay, and I can answer this one. Where do we find the new termination form in Freshdesk? I did a search and I only find the old one. So I just updated it 7 minutes ago. It's in the knowledge base, payroll support templates and forms, and it's under personnel action notice forms.
And they should be able to do the search, right? Did you do the search recently and did the new form? Because you took the old form down, right?
Yeah, like if you just search PAC, it
Mhm.
should come up. Let's see, any other questions? No other questions.
No other questions. Wow. Well, you've been a great audience.
Yeah. And then also, if you find that you have questions after the webinar is done, you know, just put a support ticket in with Cindy and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Right. And just as, you know, just as another, just want to take a reminder here at the end. This really isn't related to arrears, to be honest with you. I just wanted to kind of put this in here as a reminder regarding employees who transfer. This example here and the issue with having potential gaps in coverage and needing coordination really has nothing to do with arrears. It's just a reality of employees who transfer. And since the school year is, the end of the school year is fast approaching and it's typically the time of year where we start hearing about people transfers, I wanted to put a little bug in your ear that we need to probably do a better job at making sure that there's some kind of coordinated effort. I know that that's hard because often you don't know when someone's leaving that they're transferring. They may not have told anybody. They might not have told you, or it may happen that it takes place in the middle of the summer, you know, it kind of comes out of the blue. So you can only do what you know. But where you know, we need to try to make sure that we are doing a better job at this. So as we get closer to the end of the school year and we start talking about the key dates, spreadsheets, and all of those things that happen, you know, as we wrap up the end of the school year and the fiscal year, I think that we'll try to make sure that we highlight this because I don't think that we have done that in the past. And I think it's important for you to be aware. Whatever you can do to help us with those dates would be appreciated.
And help the employee.
And help the employee, right? All right, well, we really appreciate your time. I know that it being Ash Wednesday, this may not have been the best date and time for some of you, and we apologize for that. I promise this was not meant as your penance. It's just the timing was important. We wanted to do it as close to when this was going into effect as possible, and we also had to make arrangements for conference room space and that sort of thing. So for all of you who participated, truly appreciate it. Obviously, this is being recorded, so we'll make sure that this gets sent out afterwards and it will be on Freshdesk for you to review as well. And as always, if you have any questions, concerns, you need assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out. And my guess is that as we here essentially start to become more knowledgeable and comfortable with the arrears as well, we may be able to do, you know, other training in the future that might even be more specific about on-site checks and voids and additional checks. But right now, our testing is limited when you're trying to work with payrolls that aren't real.
Yeah.
So we want to play with those ourselves, get really comfortable, and know that when we give you future guidance, that it's, I don't know if I want to say absolute, but that it's well tested.
Right.
So again, thank you for your time, and we will hopefully see you all soon.
Bye.
Bye, God bless.